name is Alex and I am the host of How Bizarre Podcast, and this is episode 16 of the series. Hopefully you'll like it and the show will make some traction in the time ahead. So, what is this podcast about? It's about storytelling, and especially about stories that are obscure, unknown to the wider public, strange and sometimes inexplicable, content that somehow never got the attention it deserved. Stories that are forgotten in the mists of time regardless if they happened yesterday or some centuries ago. So if you are attracted to bizarre, shocking or just plainly weird stuff, I think you'll find this podcast very informative and perhaps even entertaining. This podcast is for mature audiences and listener discretion is advised. All that being said, now let us dive into the 16th episode of How Bizarre Podcast. This episode is called Lunatics on Fire. It is strange how certain crimes remain on the margins of the criminal annals, regardless of the number of victims and the method of execution, while other, much smaller crimes receive wide media space and through that way to the collective memory. Thus the massacre in Killeen, Texas, USA, in October 1991 was quickly forgotten, unworthy of anything more than the trauma of the victims' loved ones. And they were 53, quite a number, and by as many as 21 more than Le Pen's outburst in Canada 2 years before. A certain incel named George Hennard, right-wing, racist, man's man, misogynist, unemployed, dead hanging over his soul, fed up with his ordinariness, poorly noticed by members of the opposite sex, poor response to birthday invitations the day before due to his 35th birthday, he decided on a permanent solution, a murderous campaign. A lover of marijuana and alcohol, this completely ordinary character did not bounce off the white trash climate that was his destiny. Except, of course, incelism and sociopathy. As an occasional stalker and frequent speaker against women, this ex-pro soldier and ex-merchant sailor seemed destined to share the fate of 52 other people on that fateful day. On the fateful day, George drove a pickup truck through the large glass window of the local Café Libby and came out shouting something to the effect that all women are snakes and that they will see who he is. Armed with a Glock 17 and a Ruger P89, both handguns with 15-round magazines, aside from the spare magazines that the incel had, he began shooting woman after woman through the cafe. Although men also suffered, George consciously avoided killing them unless they were trying to escape. After the arrival of the local police, the incel started a firefight with them, slightly injuring 2 of them, but he was hit twice by police bullets in the stomach. Retreating to the toilet, aware that he still had a few bullets left and the pain was starting to take the little bit of his brain, he decided to blow it up with one shot. And so, with parts of the skull and brain blown across the crapper seat, the 5 minutes of fame of America's first incel mass murderer ended. 23 dead in the cafe, of which 14 were women, which means all present in the cafe at that moment, 29 wounded and 1 suicide, or a total of 53 victims, was the balance of this massacre, second committed by a raging incel. The web was only a year old, and there was no Twitter support from the million incels, but misogynistic characters could read in the newspapers about the case and recognize themselves in this maniac, the irrelevant, boring and ordinary George Hennard. And insignificance, boredom and ordinariness are the characteristics that, according to incels, should provide them with sex with beautiful women. They should have sex with beautiful women just because they exist. Today, we will get to know the ideological inclination and the rest of the abominations that are the reason for the existence of this hyperactive sect, a massive and completely current cult. In the previous part, an inadvertent error crept in, namely that incelism is an exclusively North American phenomenon, but it turned out that this is not true at all. Britain, Japan, South Korea, Perhaps even North Korea, who can tell? Australia, Taiwan. Incelism is slowly but surely spreading around the world, but for now only in the countries of the first world. Are idle hands the playground of the devil? Who could know? Has this phenomenon become an epidemic because, devoid of any existential problems, having no generational purpose like the generations before them, war to end all wars, war on fascism, democracy versus communism, sexual hippie junkie revolution to name but a few, the new Generation X and some Generation Y find themselves in no man's land, having no purpose and value, commute, work, commute again, sleep in front of a TV. All of that mixed with the lack of human and emotional contact with individuals of the opposite sex, a potential time bomb that will explode into many more heads than can be imagined. As I mentioned, incelism crossed the Atlantic and conveniently nested in the British port of Portsmouth, where an incel gerontophilia is sexual excitement towards the elderly, attempted to massacre 3 women. A certain Ben Moynihan, a 17-year-old high school student, obsessed with reading material about serial killers and obsessed with losing his virginity before 18 at any cost, even death, approached 3 women, ages 20, 46 and 67, but he was rudely rejected by everyone when he mentioned sex. Here's how this moron, who acts like he stepped out of a Serbian diesel movie from the 90s, with the obligatory gold chain, had to say. Quote, "When hot women won't talk to you, it's heartbreaking. Why are they fussy with men nowadays? I think every girl is a type of slut. They don't give boys like us a chance." Unquote. Ben wrote on social networks before going on a hike. This caused a fierce and irreversible hatred of all women in Ben, so in July 2014, Ben shot himself not because he wanted to, but because the maniacally strict gun laws in Britain replaced the traditional double-barreled shotguns and revolvers with knives, axes and machetes in committing blood crimes. What an imbecile. Not only did he like to gouge out women's eyes, he also liked to cut flesh from their bodies. The 3 women were stalked for months before Ben's truck, butchering and maiming along the way. But fortunately, his incompetence was such that in all 3 cases of revenge, he did not manage to hit any vital organ with the knife, although he caused serious injuries. Fortunately, the women not only survived but are still on their feet today. And so Mr. Moynihan, who is now 23 years old, will have to wait until 2035 to apply for a pardon, because he has been sentenced to 30 years, 21 of which are non-parole. This attack, although without fatal consequences, is ridiculous compared to Ben's idol, incelic martyr number 1. The incelic Moses named Elliot Rodger, who will be discussed later, is only an indication that even oceans, seas and mountains are powerless to stop the sectarian madness. My hope that the sect is only present in the male part of the population turned out to be in vain, because the facts also point to the existence of a female counterpart known as the femcel, women who, unlike the incel, have themselves given up sex as part of their lives. They are almost asexuals, ex-lesbians, morbidly obese girls, women who, like their male colleagues, need a life, women who abandoned any notion of self-care. There is another significant difference, most dramatically expressed through the spectacular suicide in front of primetime TV screens of a female journalist in the 70s. It's that women direct the violence inwards, not outwards. There were links on the deep web of that unfortunate event where the girl is reading the news, coolly pulls a revolver out of her purse and pours her brains out in the middle of the broadcast. Her head just falls back and that's it. No drama, nothing, a puff of smoke, totally surreal. But I still wouldn't recommend watching the miserable ending of Christina Shabuk, a smart and cute femcel, because somehow it leaves a strange dilemma. How many girls would give anything to look like her and have a career like her? It is a sad rhetorical question. By the way, 2 or 3 months ago an incident of a typical type took place. Some mental mall rat for a couple of years indulged in staring and pestering at women in the shopping center in Minnesota, and after dozens of rejections by attractive women, he was overcome by incel rage. In the performance of a manic aggression, his mind clouded by the sight of tight female asses that would never lie on his bed, hit his ass if not his ass, the ass being himself, under the name of the Sean Aranda. This idiot simply grabbed a 5-year-old boy and threw him 12 meters from the floor to the floor of the mall. Fortunately, the child had his 2nd birthday that day, so he survived somehow, after half a year of hospital stay. The sentence was 19 years for attempted murder. Until now I have avoided writing about the empire, knowingly or not, but now suddenly, shocked and taken aback and completely unaware of this sect, I have to write about this fearful phenomenon, about this extremely destructive ideology. I was also not aware of the number of incels, what by their own fault, what by the whims of fate to be born in a shitty territory, for example for a religious reason like Saudi Arabia and others in that region, or because of demographic horrors as communist China where there are 125 million more males than females in the love market. I hope you all liked episode 16 of this podcast. Thank you so kindly for listening, and I will be back next time for episode 17 of the How Bizarre podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing, and above all, subscribe to this channel, dear listener. Because, why not? Join me next time for another bizarre adventure through space and time. Cheerio.